Candidates, many first-time candidates are lining up and signing up for the 2016 primary election. And remember, it is only 6 months away. Welcome to People, Places, and Politics. I'm Patty Milne. Over these next few months, candidates, first-time candidates, experienced candidates have a lot of things to do. Much work ahead over these next several months to be ready for that election day. And it can be especially difficult or time-consuming. The time can go by really quickly for first-time candidates especially. There's so much to do. So I'm particularly happy to have with me this evening a first-time candidate, Dan Lashober.
Well done.
And we will give you an opportunity then, make sure people do know how to properly say your name. It's really not that hard. It's kind of like October, right? Lashober. Dan is running against U.S. Senator Ron Wyden. And we all know that Senator Wyden has been there for a very long time, and arguably, what has he done for Oregonians? What has he done to make things better for us here in Oregon? I know, Dan, that you've talked to a lot of people over the last several months, going back to last spring, summer, and you came to the decision to run for this position. There's a lot we're going to talk about on our show today. But first, we have to begin with the very first question every candidate is asked, whether an experienced candidate or a first-time candidate. Why are you running?
If I can first, I'll say...
Please do.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me on your show. And we talked about the name Lashober. That's very important, of course. Now, I don't mind if you mispronounce it, if you misspell it, but I hope you remember it. So I want to just help people with that real quick, if you allow me.
Please do.
It's 3 syllables, right? 3 syllables. So the first is lash. And that's really what my friends called me growing up. I don't think they ever got to the second or third syllable. They were maybe just lazy. Sometimes I tell people, if it helps, remember it rhymes with slash, like in slash the deficit. Second syllable is O, okay? Very simple, as in, oh my goodness, that's a huge mountain of debt we have to deal with. And third is burr, like in chili, as in, we don't need to be spending $4 trillion.
Right.
And that's the kind of reception I think Congress should give a president when they bring a wish list that adds up to that number. Why am I running? If it's not too insulting, I want to just say simply, because he's not doing the job, right? That's typically why anybody should be fired from their job in the long run. It's not the case, though, that it's good versus evil or Republicans versus Democrats, right? Americans are tired of that. I'm tired of that, right? We're all tired of that. It's a case where I don't think he has the right skills for the job anymore. I don't think he's got his eye on the ball when it comes to fiscal discipline and those kinds of issues. And I'm like 75% of Americans. I think Congress is doing the wrong things and not helping Americans the way they should. I'm like 65% of Americans that agree we're on the wrong track. So what I want to bring to the table, as you mentioned, fiscal discipline, okay, that's number 1 for me. I think it's a sin. I think it's immoral, the amount of debt we have in this country and that we overspend the way we do.
And they just sort of ignore it.
We just go on and on, and when we get the deficit down to $500 million, or $500 billion, we think that's a good thing, that we've accomplished something. So fiscal discipline is first and foremost in my mind. So number 2, we need somebody with real world skills. Okay, Ron Wyden studied to be a lawyer, never practiced it, spent a few years teaching Gerontology 101, and then went to college, then went to Congress for 34 years. And he's asking to go for a total of 41 now. Right? He's been there my whole adult life.
And what have, I noticed in reviewing your background, which is very diverse and very full and complements all the things that are necessary to get under control in Congress. So you have him, 34 plus years by the time his term is over, 35 years of what has he done except rake up a huge retirement and spend all his time in New York City when he's not in Congress. And what have you done, Dan? You have been traveling around the world solving problems for real companies and real budgets,
Right.
and finding solutions for problems within these organizations. So right there, there's a huge, huge difference. So talk a little bit about what some of those experiences are that you can, rely on, the what you've learned over your lifetime of real hard, kind of nose to the grindstone work.
Yeah, I call it real world experience. And I think that's the kind of person that should be going to Congress. I think you have to get some experience first if you're going to go there and talk about taxation and those kinds of things that matter to people. I spent 30 years in business, 10 roughly owning two separate businesses, small businesses on my own. I spent 12 years in a large manufacturing company. That's maybe the bulk of what we're talking about there, international experience. I spent 3 years in Canada, 5 years in Europe, working in senior finance roles. One of those roles had to do with taxation. It had to do with moving jobs from one country to another. So today when we talk about companies doing inversions, it's exactly that kind of issue that somebody has to understand before they can propose solutions. I don't have 35 years in Congress as a lifetime of political experience, but I think my experience trumps that every time. The budgeting, the finance experience. I have an MBA from Northwestern. As you say, I've spent my career working with budgets, helping people to solve those problems in the real world, in the business world. And people say, well, I'm going to go to Congress, or I'm going to run this town as a mayor or be a governor, and I'm going to run it like a business. But that's not exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about issues of accountability, issues of financial discipline, issues of understanding what the budget really means and sticking to it. That's right. And as a small business owner, I see and feel the issues that they face. They face regulation, and at the same time they face high taxation at a personal level. So when I think of things that need to be fixed, I think of corporate taxation as one of the top issues on the list to get the economic engine going. We talk about lower tax rates, that's part of it, but we need to encourage companies to invest at home. We need to encourage them to repatriate their money, and we need to encourage the strength around the world.
And that means some incentives to be doing that here instead of overseas.
That's right, that's right. We give them the perverse incentives, and we spend inordinate amounts of effort to avoid. And that's the job of the managers of these companies. They're not avoiding it because they enjoy that. They would prefer to focus on their business. That's right. And the third element, so we talk about fiscal discipline, we talk about real world experience. And if we want to talk about a platform, the third element for me is so important, and that is telling voters the hard truth. Our senators are lying to us, and I don't say that casually, Patty, I don't. This isn't about mudslinging, right? I'm going to avoid that to the best of my ability. But our senators are lying to us, particularly about Social Security. That bothers me a lot. We had the lie of the year with health care, right? They weren't forthcoming on those issues.
The lie of several years.
And that's right, and we don't need to rehash every issue there. But Social Security is in trouble, and they deny its impact on the deficit. They deny its impact on the debt. We've got only a few years before we run into real trouble and can't pay with cash coming in the benefits we want to pay. I don't know how to put it any other way. We're outspending what we take in. So if there's no fiscal discipline, if there's no real world experience, and there's no energy or effort to tell the people the truth and that we have hard problems to fix, I don't see what you're doing there. You know, we say he's been there for 34 years. What's he done for us in the last 6 years even? It's hard to make that list. When I think of running, I also think of course, you know, the elephant in the room, which is why now, why this job?
Yes.
Because I believe I can add value to that. I believe that's where my passion lies. Oftentimes people say, well, why aren't you running for something else? You know, and I think all the jobs are important. The mayor's important, the governor's important, the commissioners are important. And in fact, those people probably have a little bit more impact on your day-to-day lives than the senator does. But the ship is off course.
Yes, yes.
And I don't see us getting back on course with the current folks in office.
Do you see this as, and not specifically to Senator Wyden, but I look at there's a real lack of trust in government. People are just kind of fed up with nothing is changing. If there's any change, it's only in a negative way, and so people just don't trust what a candidate says,
Right.
and they don't trust that any promises will be kept.
It's easy to say, I'm going to go to Congress, I'm going to
Yeah.
cut. That is not the easiest thing in the world. As John Boehner said when he was nearing retirement, he said, beware false prophets. Right? That is, one man cannot step in and solve all the problems of the world. But when we talk about trust, I've already mentioned Social Security, but for me it comes down to this notion of what undergirds, or what's the foundation of the candidate, right? What goes on inside their head when they're going to make decisions. We can criticize the past decision, that's easy, playing the Monday morning quarterback.
Yeah.
But for me, and this may come as a shock to folks, if you're watching, I want you to, hold on to something at least, maybe not sitting down, but for me it's very simple. It's the Pledge of Allegiance. That's what I look to.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, well, the high-priced consultants you have, Dan, that's what they came up with. But I think that is, if not a substitute, a simple reminder of how our country's founded. So we say, the Pledge of Allegiance, I pledge to be allegiant to the flag and to the United States of America. What is the United States? The United States is a sovereign nation, but it's only sovereign if we secure our borders. We protect from threats external. And it says, I pledge allegiance to the Republic, right? And the Republic means that we're a conglomeration of states. We have a representative government, not a king. And that states' rights trump the federal government when the Constitution doesn't designate the federal government as the party with the rights and privileges. So we have the United States under attack from external threats, and I think it's under attack from internal threats. That is, threats to the Constitution. So I say to you that the pledge is a short substitute, if you will, for the Constitution, or what makes America strong. But the Constitution is under attack. And one simple example is Democrats brought out of the Judiciary Committee a year and a half ago a constitutional amendment, that is, to limit our ability to speak about the government. So they proposed the 28th Amendment. For the first time in the history of the United States, they want to degrade the rights of Americans, not increase or clarify the rights.
And that's Congress proposing this.
This is Congress.
This is not some fringe group, whether it be extremely right, extremely left, or even right down the middle. This isn't a group.
This was the majority leader of Congress.
This is disturbing.
It is. So when we go on into the pledge, we see next, we say, I pledge allegiance to the flag and the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. We're one nation under God, so I will also tell you that I want to represent all the people of Oregon. So there were some who would take God out of the pledge itself, and I know religion's under attack, but it has to share the world with the civil rights movement, and I'm going to represent all Oregonians. That's the point. I want to represent all Oregonians. It says in the pledge that we're a nation that's we're not divided, but I don't think that's the case today, right? We're indivisible. We've been divided since this president took office. It's been nothing but divisive along the lines of gender and race and class and victimhood status in my mind. And finally, the pledge says, I commit and pledge to support liberty and justice for all, right? Liberty and justice for all. If we don't secure our borders and we don't secure our Constitution from the internal threats, we're not going to have liberty. There will be no justice for all. That's where I fall out.
Oh,
so I think that's
good.
the foundation. If you remember anything else, it's fairly simple, right? It's fairly simple. We can all recite the pledge, but it's almost a mini constitution, if you will.
That's a very good analogy, and it really says everything that needs to be focused on. It really does.
We can add words around it, and we have done that. But
justice for all. Yeah, that's pretty clear. That's everybody.
Right. So again, back to maybe the question of why I'm running. One of the questions obviously is why now, right? Maybe we didn't address that. Why now? Why this job exactly? So in my life, I've got my business affairs in order. So as I told you, I'm a self-employed consultant these days. In fact, I've put them on hold. I've decided if I'm going to commit to this, it's 100%. It's a full-time job. This is not, it's not a game. My 2 children are grown. They're in college here in Oregon, so that also is a consideration. And I've been here 15 years, and I've seen the state change since I got here. So I came back from Europe after 5 years living in England, working in Europe. And it's not the same Oregon I remember, right? I came here to raise my children. I think it's a great place to live. And I saw a lot of opportunity. When I left the company, they said, you can go anywhere in the world. Where would you like to go? And I chose Portland. I chose Oregon for those reasons. But it's not the same Oregon anymore, I don't think. I think we tax ourselves to death. We've almost doubled our general fund budget since I've been here, and I don't see the improvement. We don't necessarily need to go through the litany of, again, issues around schools or unemployment rates, that kind of thing, job opportunity. But I don't think Oregon's the same place, that I came back to. And I don't think the country's the same place I came back to. I already mentioned once we're divided, right? We're more divided than we ever were. We've doubled our national debt. Again, it's sinful.
And who's going to pay for it?
Our grandchildren are going to pay for it. And I don't know how they're going to pay for it because it's huge.
Because the debt will only be greater, and getting a job will only be more difficult. Getting a good education will only be more difficult. Getting out of college without a mountain of debt that could take a lifetime to pay off. Yeah,
That's right.
What do our kids have to look forward to?
Again, back to the foundation of liberty. That's not liberty. That's
No.
not liberty.
Yeah.
We're not doing anybody any favors. Today, every American in the country owes roughly $60,000. Every man, woman, child, baby breathing owns $60,000 to the government. And I heard something the other day, and I thought, this can't happen, but they said, we're heading toward Greece. I thought, Greece?
Oh my goodness.
and the point the person made was, they said, look, when they ran into trouble, they looked to their retirement funds. And I thought, Democrats wouldn't dare. They looked to the retirement funds, and conveniently, retirement funds in this country happen to roughly equal the national debt. And I thought, that's impossible. That couldn't happen. But then you think, the trend we're on.
I just, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I can't remember all the details, but there was a proposal that, I think it's here in Oregon, that those who are with an IRA, if you're rolling it over, you have to spend it, you have to move it within maybe I shouldn't speak about it, but the details of it, the point is, this is the government getting involved in your personal finances for the betterment of the government rather than the security of the individual. So I won't get into the details because I don't want to misrepresent what it was, but it was just mind-boggling. But these are the kinds of things you're talking about that are happening at the national level as well. And the things that are passed in Congress, and the average person doesn't even know about it, but you've been following all these inside trader deals that the Congress folks are doing.
I've spent my life really focused on Congress. That's where my passion lies. So again, why now? Because these issues are paramount, and these skills that I have, I think, can add value today. So one example, let's talk about a couple examples and use this foundation to see if it applies. Because one of the examples you're talking about, I think, has to do with the Highway Trust Fund.
Oh, yeah.
Ron Wyden, as you know, rose to be the chair of the Finance Committee, being in the majority in the last couple of years when Max Baucus took off to be an ambassador. He rose to the chair of the Finance Committee, which we know is the very powerful committee in Congress, and the Highway Trust Fund issue came up. That is, it's depleted, it's out of money, was going to be by year end at that point, and he proposed a short-term fix. So this is his thinking. So, and I can only imagine, he called in his staff and said, staff, what is there to tax that we haven't taxed in this world? What's left? And has no constituent that'll complain loudly. So he came up with a short-term fix, and it was roughly $10 billion worth, and part of it was based on the back of IRAs. So he said, young people receiving an IRA as an inheritance, we would collapse the time period when you would pay the tax, and that would roughly equate to about $4 billion
You've
of the
got the
10
details
billion
on it. Thank you.
share.
Yeah.
And people watching are saying, Dan, stick to one subject. I thought we were talking about the Highway Trust Fund and roads and bridges.
Well, you are.
And we are.
That's the way Congress looks at them.
Unfortunately, that's the problem. We are.
Yeah.
And one of the ways, and one of the other fundamental principles, I suppose, undergirds my thought process is this. In manufacturing, when we have a problem, we said we're going to get to the root of the problem and figure it out before we start proposing fixes, before we can judge the fixes. We need to understand the root cause. In the case of the Highway Trust Fund, I'll take you back very quickly to George H.W. Bush. He proposed an increase in the tax, a couple pennies, and he said we're going to use it to offset the deficit. Deficit reduction, that is, we're going to keep spending. We're not going to spend it on the roads, but we're going to try to tamp down this deficit. Apparently Congress agreed and bought into that. Bill Clinton came along, said, boy, that's a great idea. Another couple pennies, we're going to apply that to deficit reduction. Not the roads, not the bridges. So now we've got maybe 4 pennies of 18 cents on a gas tax going somewhere else. Congress came to its senses at some point and said, well, we need to stop doing that. But instead, they said, let's take 1/9 of the gas tax and apply it toward things like light rail and buses and trails, or rails to trails
And
in
the
Pocatello.
bicycle lanes and the
bicycle.
concrete medians and all
And
that other fun stuff.
And what we have, that's right, is a public works slush fund now. And by some estimates, it's as much as 25% of the money goes elsewhere. So if you want to tell Americans that you need to raise revenue, there's a time and place for that. But if you're going to tell us that it's needed because things are broken and that all the money's gone, but you're not going to look at where it's being spent, I don't understand that. That's not how that's not my budget background.
And that's not how the average family handles their personal budget either.
That's right. We don't have a separate slush fund and say we're going to spend everything over here, but this we'll decide from time to time when our constituents at home need a little boost. You know, the pork barrel is alive and well in the Highway Trust Fund.
Yeah. And what do we get for highways?
That's right.
Not much.
I suppose if we have time, one other example. Maybe 2 other quick examples off of this Finance Committee. So as Finance Chairman, you have a subcommittee and you're the de facto chair of the Social Security Subcommittee. We've already mentioned to you, I believe he's lying to us about the deficits and debt. But in the recent year, we had an issue on the disability fund, right? So Social Security is broken up into two trust funds, one for disability, one for old age and survivors. So the disability portion was going to be out of money. Instead of proposing an idea to actually fix the problem, again, getting to the root of the problem, this is what Ron Wyden suggested. He said, why don't we do like we've done 11 times in the past?
Brilliant
That
idea.
is, move money from one fund to the other. Let's make an accounting gesture, not actually look to solve the problem. And of course, he lectured Republicans on getting on board with this, moving the money over. That's not new thinking. That's not a new idea at all. There are lots of ideas on how to tamp down the growth in disability, whether it's the criteria or auditing or simply limiting the total outlay. Another example that I want to touch on, and this one is simple. I think people get this, but this is the Keystone Pipeline question. And people say, what's so important about that? But I'm just trying to illustrate the thinking, behind our current office holder. So on Keystone, the president came along and said, it's not in our national interest, and it's not going to lower gas prices. And he attacked a couple other straw men that no one has ever put forward as being the reason for Keystone. But we have this pipeline section in the northern part of the country that they're trying to add and connect to the southern Keystone Pipeline, which has already been in operation for a number of years. The president said we're not going to do it, and Ron Wyden said, I vote against it when they voted this past year because it's economically dubious and it's environmentally unsound. And you have to ask yourself, how on earth would he know if it's economically dubious? Why on earth would the pipeline company want to propose a pipeline that's economically dubious? So I would say to you that it's impossible that he could tell us whether or not it's economically viable or otherwise. Second, environmentally unsound. The alternative in the government's own report is rail. And if we're going to ship more crude by rail, we have to ask ourselves, is that the environmentally sound solution? And while it's safe, it's the study done by the Canadian government and by our government says it's roughly 4 times more incident related than moving crude by pipeline. So we have more than 2 million miles of pipeline in this country, and it's not all 24-inch feeder pipe for crude oil, but I don't remember Ron Wyden talking about the economic viability of that, and I don't remember him talking about the environmental soundness of those pipelines. And in this case, he's advocating for more rail trains. Is that what Oregon needs? Is that what we're after?
It is an interesting position that he's taken on that, and I know we just were vacationing in Canada just right about the time of their election, and I think there's great disappointment in this recent position and action.
7 years of dithering.
Yeah, it's very well said.
And as far as I'm concerned, you know, it's Mr. Bipartisan acting in a purely partisan manner. There is no other explanation for that kind of vote. Purely partisan vote.
Good. Well, you can see that this man here sitting and speaking, Dan Lashober,
Very well.
is has a very deep understanding of these issues. As you say, this is your passion. You've been watching this and studying the issues and putting your own knowledge and expertise behind what you've observed and what real solutions could be. So I want to thank you for joining me. Before we run out of time, give the audience your contact information, feel free, website, phone number, whatever you can provide.
Okay. Very briefly, just summarize. You know, like a lot of Americans, I'm disappointed in the direction we're heading, but I think we're headed toward more economic freedom, more self-governments, more liberty, more strength abroad, and more prosperity at home if we elect Republican presidents and we elect the right people to Congress. It's not about me, and it's not just about Ron Wyden. We need to get America back on track. So, I would love to get the help from all the Oregonians. I need that help. We know Ron Wyden has more than $5 million in the bank today, and will certainly have plenty of money at his disposal, so I need volunteers. You can contact me through my website. It's Lashober2016.com. The name is Lasch. If that's all you get, that'll bring it up, I expect. And you can contact me at my my email, dan@Lashober2016.com, and I'll be happy to get back to you and explain my positions. And I'm looking for volunteers, always volunteers, and help around the state.
Good. Again, Dan Lashober, running against U.S. Senator Ron Wyden, and please give him a call, contact him, go to his website. There's a lot of good information on that website, and let's help change Oregon. It's
early, but I need your vote. Oregon needs your vote.
These last few months before the primary are going to go very, very quickly. So
I'm sure they will.
Good. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks again for having me on your show.
Best of luck.
Thank you.